NBA top 100 lists figure to look a lot different due to injuries. How many of those players are going to be on the Bucks roster this go round? Camille and I take a look coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making this your first listen of the day, each and every day. You can hear me, of course, on the Bucks Radio Network. You can find Camille's work on the Locked On NBA show and the Technical Foul podcast as well. So it's getting to be just around that time, Camille, where every outlet is going to put out their top 100 players. We, of course, are working on something as well on the Locked On Network, which will be coming out momentarily here. And it gets you to thinking about the overall makeup of this roster. And I think we've talked quite a bit about it. It's going to be a reoccurring theme throughout this week and the rest of the offseason as we anticipate the Bucks are largely done. But let's just start there with the top 100. Everyone is different, obviously. I think The Athletic or Sports Illustrated, one of the two from a year ago, I believe the Bucks had 4 on that list at the start of the season with Giannis and Dame, Chris Middleton, and Brook Lopez, the 4th. So we had to submit our own, not necessarily rankings, but here's how we would rank the guys on the roster. And we haven't seen who the top 100 are just yet. But how many would you guess players the Bucks would have on a top 100 ranking this year?
Well, it was 4 last year, and 3 of them are gone off the roster now. I would assume that Myles Turner makes the cut in that top 100 list, but after that is where I'm really interested in seeing how it shakes out. Like, if the Bucks, they might only have 2 players represented on the top 100 list going into this upcoming season. Like, I'm still working on my personal 100 to submit for the network rankings. One, a very difficult exercise to actually just kind of go through and try to rank the 100 best players in the NBA. But Bucks wise, I think we might only see 2 on the list heading into this year. But if things break a certain way, they might be able to have a few more by the end of the year.
I would guess it's 2 as well. Just Giannis and Myles Turner. If the NBA 2K rankings are any example of that, I think it's really going to be 2. I mean, and not a whole lot of love for AJ Green's ranking there. And basically every guard the Bucks had on the roster was a 77 or a 79 ranking, according to NBA 2K. So last year, and again, every major publication, and as we said, we're doing one for Lockdown. Every outlet does this. But the most recent one was The Ringer. So last year they had Nikola Jokic number 1, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander number 2, and this was, I believe, after the season ended. They went through and re-ranked these. And then Giannis clocked in at number 3. So looking through those top 3, no surprise there, as we've said. I mean, everybody says Giannis is, without question, one of the top 3 players in the league. It's a top 2. Like, I get that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander won the MVP and is off to a great start in his career. It is Giannis and Nikola Jokic, and then there's a gap and everyone else. But you got to scroll down quite a ways to find the next Buck on the list. And some of the names that you talk about within the division, too, guys like Cade Cunningham rising up that list. Evan Mobley was viewed as a top 20 player. Paolo Banchero and Pascal Siakam, both in the top 25. So we've hit 30, Camille, and Darius Garland as well. We've hit 30. Still nobody else from the Bucks. So then you scroll through the 30s, and we're still looking. You scroll through the 40s. Like, I think that's what we're in store for. Damian Lillard was number 2 last year for Bucks players, and he came in ranked at number 43. So it's a pretty steep drop-off when you take him off the list. And you may say, the name we mentioned, who is probably number 2 on this list. Not probably. I would assume he would be the number 2 player on the list for the Bucks. In Myles Turner. We're into the top 75 here, Camille, and there is no Myles Turner. Andrew Nembhard, Pascal Siakam, and Tyrese Halliburton were all ranked in front of him. Myles Turner clocked in at number 76 a season ago. And I would imagine that's probably where he's going to sit, which makes the conversation even more interesting, how much we've preached. It's a different NBA now that, depth is important. It's not so much top tier, front loaded rosters. I think this is the okay, prove it example here, because the Bucks are probably going to clock in. I would imagine the average would be Giannis probably checks in number 3, just about every list. And the next best is going to be Myles Turner, probably somewhere around 80.
Which is wild to really think about, because even the Dame ranking with him being 43, I think if I remember correctly, is like low for the ringer, but this was after the season. Like I think he was still in the 30s and whatnot before the injury, when he was still playing with the Bucks. So to think about the fact that according to most lists here, the Bucks are going to have a top 3 player in the NBA and then one other player that's top 80-ish. And really that player is coming in that 70 to 80 range. And again, I'm going to say this, it is the end of July here. If the Bucks exceed expectations this upcoming season, like all of this again is writing the script for a great narrative to go along with the Giannis MVP campaign. If the numbers are correct there, because you can look at the roster, like I just want all of the conversations to remain sincere around it. Like if you believe that this Bucks roster has one top 3 player, I think 3 is the lowest. I would personally rank Giannis. And that's on the low end. Like if I saw Giannis ranked outside of the top 3, I would be actually shocked at how the list turns out. Yeah. You have a top 3 player and you're saying that there's only one other player that's, one of the 100 best players in the league. And if they exceed expectations, like it has MVP written all over it for Giannis, in my opinion. But after Myles Turner, I think the question of like who are the Bucks' 3rd, 4th, 5th best players gets really interesting. Like they might not be seen as top 100. I'll be curious to see if maybe a Bobby Portis sneaks in at the end of that because of just, who he is as a person, what he's been able to do. But like, I think I'd still be shocked if the Bucks get more than 2 on this list.
Yeah, there's some interesting names on there. And again, we're just highlighting the ringer because that was the most recently updated. But to me, when you start to get into the names like CJ McCollum, Devin Vassell, Anthony Simons, an interesting one. Those are the names. Josh Giddey too. You're like, whoa. The Bucks, you're telling me none of those names we mentioned at least have the opportunity to get to that level or higher. There's one name to me that I think is probably going to be excluded from this list, but the guy that has the best chance to go from excluded to at least cracking the back 25 in that 75 to 100 range. I have a thought. I'm curious if you do as well. We'll get to that conversation and just take a look at, okay, as it stands, assumption is Myles Turner is number 2. What is the rest of the flow chart for this Bucks roster? We'll get into that coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you about our friends over at 5 Hour Energy. You know the time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. Some days on the course, on or off, you just need that extra boost to stay sharp and energized. I reach for a 5 Hour Energy every game day. When those days start to get longer, I always got at least one of them in my bag and by my side, and especially this time of year out there on the golf course. Golf is all about good times with good people and good flavors. The grape, ginger, lime flavor gives you the best parts of your clubhouse to go without chasing down the bev card. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. That's the number 5hourenergy.com. And use our promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order, and it cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion flavored 5-hour energy shots today. So number 2, the new Robin for Giannis this year would have to be Myles Turner. I think we're obviously in agreement there. But I mentioned there's a guy to me that I think is not going to be in the top 100 for anyone that puts together these rankings, but probably has the best chance to crack it of anyone on the Bucks at season's end when you go through this study again next offseason. Before do you have a guess who I'm going to say?
I would think you're gonna go with Gary Trent Jr. because he has an opportunity. If he's the starting shooting guard next to Giannis, we kind of saw the flashes of what he could possibly do in the playoffs against the Pacers as well. So my guess would be Gary Trent Jr.
Okay, I think Gary Trent Jr. has a chance too to at least crack like the 90s, and especially one of those names I mentioned, like Anthony Simons, I believe came in like 87 or something on this ringer list a season ago. Yeah, 87. I frankly don't see much of a gap there or difference at all between Gary Trent Jr. and Anthony Simons, and especially when you factor in the two-way play. So I think there's a really good chance if we just compare those two guys, Gary Trent Jr. is clocking in ahead of him next year. The guy that I was thinking of, though, that I think is going to have the biggest opportunity, boom or bust here, is Kevin Porter Jr., that he's going to have the ball in his hands quite a bit. We know the talent is there. The Bucks have seen firsthand his ability to take over games, both as a member of the Bucks and against the Bucks. That I think the ceiling for him is probably the highest of any player not named Giannis on this Bucks roster. Now, does that mean he's going to be an all-star? No, not necessarily, but if there's one guy that you told me, wow, he really exploded in this new role and taking on a higher usage rate, I think it's him.
So I think that's a really interesting answer too, which I would have no qualms with that being the case because I can see the pathway forward for it, similar to what I was saying about Gary Trent, where there's an opportunity there for you because we don't know of this recording, like who technically is going to be the starting point guard for the Milwaukee Bucks. We're assuming it's Kevin Porter Jr. just kind of based on things we've heard Doc Rivers mention and just how the lineups worked out for the Bucks down the stretch here after Dame's injury last season. So I can definitely understand that. But I'm curious, what about Kevin Porter Jr.'s game do you think is like, hey, this is why I think he's going to be the guy to do this over like a Gary Trent Jr. who come playoff time last year against the Pacers, he had reliable. a bigger impact in that playoff series. And I know people are going to mention the 2 turnovers late in that game. Yeah, we know, but we also know that without Gary Trent Jr. getting crazy hot like he did, you don't get to the opportunity to blow the game down the stretch there. But I'm just curious because both of those guys, Gary and Kevin, I think are going to have great opportunities this upcoming season. What about Kevin Porter Jr.'s game makes you think like, hey, I think he actually has a better chance of breaking out over somebody like Gary Trent Jr.?
Yeah. So, and I guess full transparency too, Gary Trent Jr. was the second leading scorer in the playoffs for the Bucks. Now it's the smallest of sample sizes. It's just 5 games, but he essentially doubled up the point production of Kevin Porter Jr. Now, it was only 2 games and half a quarter that you had Damian Lillard out there, but that was a small component. I think the big thing to me is the takeover ability in that, again, the ball is going to be in his hands a lot. You know, outside of Giannis, probably the second most of anybody on the team that he's going to be handling. I would say definitely the second most of anybody on the team that he's going to have the ball in his hands. And I think you'll look for creative ways too, where, you know, you just said we both assume he's going to start. I think a big portion of that is not only what we've heard Doc and company say about him, how we saw that fit last year, but also one of the things, I think we talked about this with Chris Johnson last week. If he doesn't start, you're basically, not that there's no defense, but you're going all gas, no brakes with that bench of like, okay, Kevin Porter Jr., Cole Anthony, Bobby Portis, who knows, maybe AJ Green doesn't start either, or one of the two between he and Gary Trent Jr. isn't starting, and you're starting one of the other 2 names that people would not be too fond of in the starting lineup. So that's a lot of scoring punch. So that's the biggest reason why I think he's going to be starting and trying to put your best foot forward alongside Giannis. I just think the talent is undeniable, and it always has been with Kevin Porter Jr. It's been putting the rest of it together. And again, and John Horst was the first to point this out, it's not the largest sample size. It's not one that we typically would look to and say we have confidence in this, but in that small sample size, you saw what he's capable of doing. And that was largely in the shadow of Damian Lillard. We were still kind of wondering what's it going to look like when Dame comes back. Obviously, you just had a couple of games of that in the playoffs and a couple leading up to the blood clot issue for Dame. But now, there's none of that ambiguity. It's Giannis is the point guard, but you're playing the point guard position in name only for us. So you're number 2. Don't look over your shoulder. There's no Dame return. Just go get him. And I think with that clarity, with his talent, he is probably the second most talented player on this team.
I mean, and again, we've seen the highs that Kevin Porter Jr. can have. We saw some of the flashes here in Milwaukee when the playmaking was looking really nice to go along with him being aggressive, being able to touch paint, which is another aspect of this Bucks roster that I've been starting to think about, because when you do lose a Damian Lillard, you lose somebody who created a lot of free throw opportunities. So we know what Giannis can do when it comes to creating opportunities, but Dame was right there with him. Those two are a large reason that the Bucks remain one of the top free throw shooting teams by attempts throughout the season. So without him, it's like, who else on the team has the kind of juice that they can get into the paint, possibly draw fouls, not shy away from contact? And I think Kevin Porter Jr. is a guy that can definitely do that for the team because he has the speed. You have to respect it. He kind of has that herky-jerky style that he can play with getting defenders on their heels. So I think that's a great person to point to of being like, hey, your opportunity is going to be there. And we already heard Doc Rivers himself mention that of all the players, he thinks that Kevin Porter Jr. is going to be the guy who can have the biggest impact. I'm still leaning towards Gary Trent, and a lot of it is for similar reasons. I don't think he'll have the ball in his hands as much as Kevin Porter Jr. will, but I think he's going to have the opportunity to really be like the Bucks' second leading scorer.
Which one would prove to be more costly for the Bucks in terms of their contract?
Shoot, probably Kevin Porter Jr. at this point. If he really hits those peaks, that could be disconcerting for the Bucks' pockets going forward.
We mentioned those two names, and we said the second best player on this roster, at least the outside assumption, is going to be Myles Turner. But there's one thing we didn't get into about Myles Turner. We'll get into that conversation coming up next. So again, and this is just going off where we assume guys are going to be slotted in the rankings. Myles Turner is going to be the number 2 Buck in that group on this roster this season. But we just both named a couple guards. I think there's a pretty big contingency of Bucks fans that are going to say, the guy that I think is going to jump up there is AJ Green. Mm-hmm. And he's, going to double his 3-pointers made from a season ago and start to get into that conversation. Other people might say Ryan Rollins, right? That, hey, this guy neck and neck with Kevin Porter Jr. and he's going to take on this role and he's going to really shine. I think this is a guy that's going to stand out. You mentioned Bobby Portis might even jump up there. Mm-hmm. There's going to be an expanded role for Bobby, you would assume, with some of those names gone and the need for some scoring punch. But we didn't mention Myles Turner as one of those candidates of like, wow, this is going to be a perfect, and this isn't to say we think it's a bad fit, but like, wow, Myles Turner clearly number 2. Is that a bad thing? And I guess the second part to that is, okay, what if Myles Turner is the guy that jumps up the most? Is that more good or bad for the Bucks? For the reason being, well, if he does, what happens to all those other guards that we just mentioned?
Right. Because I mean, when you think about it, I think there's a couple things to clarify, because one, we were already, like you mentioned, assuming that Myles Turner will be considered the second best player on the Milwaukee Bucks this upcoming season. He'll probably be the guy you see in the Locked On Top 100 list outside of Giannis representing the Bucks on the list. But there's a difference between second best player and then like second option offensively, because the offensive part of it being a second option, it's only looking at that side of the ball offensively. But I think what Myles Turner can also bring defensively is part of why I've been saying, like, I think he'll be like the second best player, quote unquote, on the Milwaukee Bucks because of what he can do protecting the rim. A little bit better foot speed than what we saw from Brook Lopez. Still not somebody you really want out there switching a lot defensively, but I think he'll hold up a little bit better than what we saw Brook do last season. So I think that aspect of his game is what comes into it, because I think I would honestly be a little surprised if Myles Turner was the team's second leading scorer this upcoming season. Like, when you look at the numbers too, the highest he's ever averaged in the season is 18 points, which is nothing to sneeze at, which was 3 years ago for the Pacers. And again, something to sneeze at there. We saw Kevin Porter Jr.'s season high, 19.2 points. We've seen Gary Trent Jr. 18.3 himself. So like, they're all kind of in that same range when you're looking at what their career best scoring has been. But when playing next to Giannis and thinking about how the offense is going to move with him being the main facilitator and what that looks like, to me, it just makes me think like those guards are going to have a little bit more opportunity to get their scoring on than a Myles Turner will, especially when you look at the lineups when Giannis does sit and Giannis is on the bench. Who has the ball in their hands? Who's controlling the tempo? Gary Trent Jr., we saw throughout the playoffs, was a guy who you can kind of give the ball to and he can go create his shot. He can go to the mid-range a little bit. He's going to take the threes when he's catch and shoot. But if he has the ball in his hands too, he's going to be able to go and kind of get it himself. Kevin Porter Jr., we saw the potential of that as well. So when thinking about them and Myles Turner, it's just like the way Myles gets his buckets are a bit different than how the guards do, because he's not going to have the ball in his hands as often. But if Myles Turner is having a career year from three where he's knocking down those open shots at a really good rate, he's able to clean up, because one area in his game that's a little bit not as good as Brook Lopez is just finishing around the rim and his touch there. So like, if those numbers can come up in addition to him knocking down the open threes, like, there could be a world where Myles Turner is your second leading scorer. It's just thinking about how you get to it. I feel like the pathway for Gary or Kevin being that second leading scorer is a little bit clearer than the path that Myles Turner has.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned it in not only our conversation with Chris, but a couple of times too, like, the interesting component to Myles Turner's game that, I mean, the Bucks didn't have outside of Chris Middleton is when he's not hitting threes, he's usually scoring from the mid-range in those quick pick and pops where he's right around the free throw line. So it's going to be interesting to see what that opens up for Giannis. That it's, you know, we saw Brook experiment with that little one-handed floater around the free throw line, but it was primarily threes. And then occasionally we'd see Brook, but taking more, clearing out more space around the rim. What that would do for Giannis is certainly interesting. Myles Turner was the fourth leading scorer for the Indiana Pacers a season ago. And I think we talked about this once before. You know, the Pacers had 7 double-digit scores on their team a year ago. I think the Bucks had 8, but there was multiple guys that either came or went through the trades, and it was pretty flat, where Pascal Siakam was their leading scorer at 20 points per game. Then Tyrese Halliburton just under 19, then Benedict Mathurin with 16. Then it was Myles Turner at 15.5. And then you had 3 guys at around 12 or 10 points per game. I think that's largely where the Bucks are going to be, that you're going to have Giannis at 30. And then I think you're going to have maybe 4 or 5 guys that are in 16, 17, 18 points per game. And this is going to be the, okay, is that more effective than to have, you know, the numbers we kept touting of, oh, Giannis and Dame, 55 points per game, leading scoring duo in the league. You won one playoff game with those 2 guys on the floor. Obviously, it's not just because of those 2. There are other variables. But is this something that fits better? The interesting part is going to be the games where Giannis is not available. And in the past, you would say, well, this is a Dame game. Or when Chris Middleton was still on the roster, here's your opportunity to carry the scoring. So who's going to pick it up in those spots? But how is the scoring going to look on this team? And I mean, could they push 8 guys, 9 guys consistently throughout the roster close to double-digit scoring or at double-digit scoring?
I think that's quite possible. Like, I went through a few weeks ago and just looked at some of the playoff teams and how their scoring was divided and everything like that. Like, how many of them had double-digit scores throughout the entire regular season? And of the playoff teams, Detroit, surprisingly enough, had the most double-digit scores on their roster, but only one guy that crossed that 20-point per game line, which was Cade Cunningham, of course. But they had 9 different guys who had double-digit scoring. And you got to account for the fact that Dennis Schroeder was traded there, and Ivy was averaging like 17 points per game before he got hurt. So he only played about 30 games, but they had around 8 consistent guys since Ivy was out that were averaging at double-digit scoring before and after the deadline. And to your point about Milwaukee, like Chris Middleton was averaging a little bit over 12 points per game while he's with the Bucks. Was traded for Kuz, who was averaging double-digit scoring. Then you bring in Kevin Porter Jr., who was averaging double-digit scoring for somebody who was not in Marjon Beauchamp. So prior to the deadline, the Bucks really had like 6 guys in their rotation. Afterwards, they had about 7 throughout the year. So I can see a world where that comes up, because you look at like a AJ Green, who averaged 7 points a game this past season. I can see a world where AJ Green crosses averaging
Doubles
at
that,
least 10
yeah.
points. Like, he has to, honestly. Like, if he's getting the volume of 3-point shots that I want to see him get this upcoming season, he should be averaging at least 10 points per game. So you have another guy right there. You have Bobby. We've talked about Kuz already. He can at least get you 10 there. So, like, I think that the Bucks will be able to have a roster here where you have 8, maybe 9 guys that are averaging at least 10 points per game. And we'll have to see if that formula is going to be enough for some consistent wins. But again, I think with Giannis at the helm, you can get there. And it's just about which of these guys can consistently do it. And we talked about it. Some nights it might be, a Gary Trent Jr. night where he goes off for 25 or whatever the case may be. The next night it might be AJ. The next night it might be Kevin. The next night it might be Bobby. And I think, to answer your initial question around when Giannis sits, who really steps up? And I really think that's Bobby Portis, because we have seen when Giannis sits, Bobby's numbers can really go up in those situations.
Yeah, and look, I think one of the interesting things that we can certainly get into in much greater detail in an upcoming show here is we have both, and I think most everyone listening to these shows assumed Giannis is going to be at 30 points a game. And, we had the conversation a couple of shows ago too. Like, what's more likely? Giannis scores 33 points per game, or Giannis has 8 assists per game. What if he doesn't score as much by choice? That it's Giannis, the facilitator, that's close to averaging a triple-double, and he's averaging 27 or 28. And you see those other guys, Gary Trent Jr., AJ Green, Kevin Porter Jr., Bobby even, averaging more points where it's spread out. I mean, that is on the table as well. And I think as we wrap this part of the conversation, you mentioned looking through some previous teams as well. There's a couple that stood out to me, but really one that you look at and you say, that's probably the most realistic comp for this Bucks team. I thought about some of the recent Miami Heat teams. You'd say, okay, not necessarily like superstar scoring averages, but when Jimmy Butler was on the teams, they had 3 20-point scores, and it was basically like right at 20 with Jimmy Butler and Bam and Tyler Hero, and then a pretty even spread of scoring from the rest of the guys, around like 14 or so points from 3 or 4 other guys. If the Bucks get 3 20-point scores, it's because Giannis is averaging 25, and we're seeing Giannis averaging 10 assists per game. But the one that stood out to me is a team that the Bucks are certainly very familiar with, Camille, and that's the 2021 Atlanta Hawks, who were led in scoring by Trae Young at 25. But then you had John Collins, Bogdan Bogdanovic, Clint Capella, DeAndre Hunter, all at like 15 to 18 points. Danilo Gallinari was at 13. Kevin Huerter was at 12. Cam Reddish was at 11. Lou Williams was at 10. They had 9 guys scoring double-digit points per game. And it was one guy that was far and away the leading scorer, and then a pretty even mix. And that team reached the conference finals.
It did. We know that. We know that here in Milwaukee that they reached the conference finals, but that really could be the pathway for the Bucks. And I think it is going to look like that, where Giannis is clear and by far the leading scorer for the team. And then you have a grouping of guys there where the averages are pretty close because, again, every night is going to be a different guy whose night it happens to be. But if Giannis is the facilitator here that we've seen, and he's averaging, a career high in assists this upcoming year, what can that do for his teammates, especially if this is a Bucks team that can knock down threes at an efficiency rate similar or better to what we saw them do last year? It's just like, can we increase the volume of those 3-point shots? And if you do increase the volume and you have good efficiency with it, like, you should see the scoring averages of all those other guys around Giannis going up. So, like, there is definitely the pathway for that to happen.
Well, leave your thoughts in the comments. We think we know what it's going to be going into the season any day now when we get these rankings. But at season's end, who would be the second highest ranked Buck on the roster here behind Giannis? And what's the scoring going to look like for this group? You leave your thoughts in the comments for that. Leave your questions as well. We mentioned on social media, we're putting together a mailbag show here in the coming days. We'll loop in Frank for that as well. We've already seen quite a few questions come through, so thanks for those. And continue to drop those on the email address. You can tweet them to Camille and I or Frank, and leave them in the comments as well. That'll do it for today's show. For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk with you guys once again tomorrow on Locked On Bucks.